Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I'm Anissa Putritami. On this occasion, I will explain the material about analyze the measuring calculation and analysis of gross domestic product, consumer price index, GDP deflator, and unemployment rate, which they consist of three main explanations, namely the first gross domestic product deflator, and second, consumer price index, and the last, unemployment rate. Okay, for the first, I will explain about what is GDP deflator. GDP deflator is also known as GDP price deflator. It measures the impact of inflation on the GDP of an economy during a period of one specific fiscal year. GDP deflator is a factor by which normal GDP is adjusted to calculate real GDP. For the formula of GDP, GDP deflator equal normal GDP divided real GDP multiply 100. So, the point GDP deflator is a factor by which nominal GDP is adjusted to calculate real GDP. It adjusts gross domestic product by removing the effect of rising price inflation. It shows how much an economic's GDP is really growing. Therefore, if there was no inflation involved, the nominal GDP would equal the real GDP. The GDP price inflator calculates the impact of inflation on the finished goods and product by converting an economic output into current price, thereby demonstrating the impact of inflation on the GDP change. It is a measure of price inflation or deflation with respect to a specific base year. The GDP deflator of the base year is equal to 100. Since it is relative to the base year, it will tell us how much the price have adjusted. If there has been inflation, GDP deflator would be more than the base year price, and if there is deflation, that it would be less. Meanwhile, for the description formula is as follows, where nominal GDP equal GDP evaluated using current market price. The real GDP equal GDP evaluated using base year price or inflation adjusted GDP. In this formula, figure 100 indicates the base year price so that the relative data can be interpreted easily. The next, for example, now, by reverting the formula, we would calculate the implicit price deflator for the years 2017. Base year is taken as 2012, where implicit price deflator is 100. Nominal GDP equal 152.51 trillion, real GDP equal 121.19 trillion. So, GDP deflator is 125.10 in comparison to the base year 2012 to the year 2017. This means that the aggregate level of price increased by 25.1% from the base year 2012 to the year 2017. Please remember GDP deflator is always calculated rupiah GDP value to avoid exchange rate impact. This is because an economic's real GDP is calculated by multiplying its current output by its price from a base year. So, the GDP deflator will have identified how much price have inflated over a specific time period. The second point about consumer price index or CPI. Main measure of price change at the retail level measure change in the cost of buying a representative fixed basket of goods and services, generally accepted as a measure of inflation in the country. The next function of CPI. 1. Used most widely as measure of inflation. 2. Viewed as an indicator of the effectiveness of government economic policy. 3. Provides information about price change in the nation economy to government business, labor, and private citizen. And 4. With the President, Senate, and Congress in making economic decisions. And the last shows trend in the CPI to aid in the formulating fiscal and monetary policies. Formula used for CPI. And this is example for computation of CPI. The last material about unemployment rate. Unemployment refers to a situation in which the workers who are capable of working and willing to work do not get employment. Economists typically focus on the unemployment rate. The unemployment rate is expressed as a percentage and is calculated as follows. The formula is unemployment rate equal unemployment worker divided total labor force multiply 100. As defined by the International Labour Organization, unemployed workers are those who are currently not working but are willing and are able to work for pay, currently available to work, and actively searching for work. The last solution. The solution, the first, a change in the pattern of investment. After that, encouragement to small enterprise as against big enterprise. The next, problem of choice of technique. After that, encouragement of new growth centered in the small town and rural areas. Next, subsidies on the basis of employment. Finally, reorientation of educational policy.